Egyptologist, Mr. Samir Abbass. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Morning.
Morning, Mr. Samir. First, let's shed light on the significance of Sinai's geographical location.
So, the uniqueness of Sinai, that it lies in the northeast of Egypt as a gateway to Egypt. Throughout the history of Egypt, Sinai was always the gate to Egypt. And unfortunately, most of the time, that was a gate which is used by our enemies to take over our lands. So Sinai is trapped between the Gulf of Aqaba and the Gulf of Suez, with the Mediterranean Sea on the north and the Gulf of Aqaba to the east and the Gulf of Suez to the west. So the size of Sinai itself, the area, is covers nearly 60,000 square kilometers, which is roughly speaking that would be like 10 to 12% of Egyptian land, with actually more specific 6% of the Egyptian land, and with a population which is less than 1% or 1.2% of Egyptian population living there. So the importance of Sinai that it is very rich with resources. From ancient Egyptian time, it was called Mafkat, which is the land of the turquoise mines. It was also the source of the copper. That's where the ancient Egyptian people they mined their copper from, and some of the semi-precious stones and some stones blocks which is used in art, like statues and coffins for the ancient Egyptians as well. So the ancient Egyptians themselves they realized that how Sinai is very, very important for them.
That's why we always say it is the land of treasures.
Exactly.
And even talking about the strategic importance as well, because it's not only today, talking about the strategic importance for ancient Egyptians at that time.
So definitely, so first let's try to explain how old is the Egyptian presence in Sinai. So the Egyptians they are very much tied to the Nile Valley. I'm talking about the ancient Egyptian and even the Egyptian today. When you look at Egypt map today and the distribution of population along Egypt, you will find that is nearly 90% of the Egyptian population living along the Nile Valley, which is like 7% of the Egyptian lands. So the ancient Egyptians, they were mostly living along the Nile River. That's the main source of water. But that didn't stop them from exploring and claiming other lands as an Egyptian territory, and that was happening as early as the Old Kingdom, and even before the Old Kingdom in early dynastic period. So the history of Sinai dates back not only to 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, which is the age of the Egyptian kingdom, the Egyptian as a state, but also before that to the Stone Age. There is lots of stone tools has been found in Sinai. When it comes to the stone tools, we are talking a very large period of prehistory, which is estimated of like 200,000 years, which is ended nearly 9,000 PC. There is an evidence that there was an early settlers in Sinai even before the foundation of Egypt as a state in Sinai. So after that, there is a very mysterious buildings in Sinai which is called Nawamis. For those who are doing trekking and hiking in Sinai, they know what I'm talking about. A very mysterious buildings, houses built out of stones, not using cements to put the stones together. And these Nawamis, which is used by early settlers before the foundation of Egypt as a state, as houses for them, and they used to mine stones and copper as well there. And then moving forward to the Egyptian kingdom. And we have very valuable tablets has been found in Sinai. Very valuable monuments has been found in Sinai. There is countless number of archaeological sites on Sinai. Sarabit al-Khadim, for example, is one of the very rich sites and one of the very famous sites, which is in the heart of Sinai, and that was built. Sarabit al-Khadim is a big temple and a big mining site as well. So all that is a very strong evidence of ancient Egyptian. They claimed Sinai as an Egyptian territory. In the Egyptian Museum, I remember when I took a tour of American senators, that was 2010, and they came on an official visit to Egypt, and I have the privilege to take them on a tour in the Egyptian Museum. So I tailored my tour in a way that to prove that Sinai is an integral part of Egypt, not the other way around like what they think, or many of the Western, they think that Sinai is not integral part of Egypt. Which is gives.
So you have evidence for this.
Exactly. So in the Egyptian Museum, I wish actually we can bring this tablet, which is from the time of Senefro. Yes. That should be, which is I brought with me, show the king of Egypt Senefro holding his mace, which is like a hammer, or like a sword. and he's punishing his enemies. And this tablet was found in the heart of Sinai. So it's not only Sennacherib. Sennacherib, he ruled Egypt 4,500 years ago. For those who don't know Sennacherib, he is the father of Cheops or Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid.
Yeah.
Even from Dynasty 3 and Dynasty 2, we have evidence in Sinai that it was integral part of Egypt. So the problem, when I was preparing my material, actually, I noticed that in English references, many of these references which is written by like Israeli scholars or Westerns which they are biased to the Israeli backgrounds. And that's why we come to the dispute idea of the confusing idea about that, which is unfortunately gave the excuse for. That's one of the tablets which is showing graffitis, which is showing the Egyptians and evidence of the Egyptian presence, the ancient Egyptian presence in Sinai as old as the Old Kingdom. So the dispute actually happens, which has led to the Israeli army to invade Sinai, that they think, based on their own reference, that Sinai, they have a historical rights in Sinai. And that I think that is the key point for our talk today, is how is that possible? So, and they think that the Exodus, which is where Moses led the Israelites outside of Egypt, so, and they lived in Sinai, which is, they consider Sinai the land of millions, the wandering land, for 40 years. They consider that the earliest and the most documented big events where a big population belongs to a certain tribe lived in Sinai, and that is considered the historical rights. So here is the map of Sinai, but we believe that happens. But they are always trying to push the timeline back. They are trying to push the timeline in a way that to give them a historical advantage.
So this is physical evidence of that Sinai is an integral part 4,500 years.
Exactly. So, and that is even can be easily proved from their text from the book of Exodus, which is talk about Per-Ramesu, which is the ancient Egyptian capital in that time. So the ancient Egyptian capital in that time, that was established in the delta in the northeast of Egypt. So these are the Nawamis I'm talking about. These are the mysterious buildings and houses, which is by early settlers in Sinai in prehistorical time. And unfortunately, there is not much monuments or like better to say like tablets or physical documentation, physical evidence has been found in Sinai. There is some sites, but during the Israeli occupation in Sinai, they were so active. There was more than 30 archaeological missions in 30 archaeological sites in Sinai from 1967 until 1982. They are very active in exploring and finding and taking away, stealing many of this evidence. But still Sinai still have evidence, and what has been found before, and the good news that we managed to return some of this evidence after the peace negotiation, which is started in 1980s.
So can you elaborate
on 1970s?
Yes. Okay. On it being the first connection between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean.
So that will bring us to the Middle Kingdom. So we're talking about the Old Kingdom, and we prove that through Sennacherib tablets and through Sahara and other tablets that there was an Egyptian presence in Sinai, considered Sinai an integral part of Egypt from the Old Kingdom, and that is unlike what the Israeli actually promoting for, that they had an advantage for being there first, because their history dates back to the New Kingdom, not the Old Kingdom. So we are talking about 1,300 years before the Israelites. We have a physical evidence that Egyptian or Sinai was integral part of Egypt. So in the Middle Kingdom, there was a project of connecting the Red Sea with the Mediterranean Sea, which is nowadays we call it the Suez Canal. So it is a misconception to say that this idea was brought by Europeans, by French and British. No, the idea was actually Middle Kingdom kings. Senusert, the king Senusert, who ruled Egypt nearly 3,800 years ago, he connected the Red Sea with the Mediterranean Sea through the Nile River using Suez Canal. And that was one of the very important projects which is held in Egypt in that particular time. Then moving along to the New Kingdom. In the New Kingdom, that was the most richest part of the history of Sinai related to Egypt. Because in the New Kingdom, or before the New Kingdom, Egypt has been invaded by tribes, the Hyksos, and they came across Sinai, and they invaded the north part of Egypt for 120 continuous years, and they managed to push out, exiled, defeated, and pushed out of Egypt through Sinai. And to make sure that when Ahmose did that, and that the following kings after him as well, they made sure that they will like to secure this route. across Sinai to make sure that Egypt will not be invaded, because they learn from their history. So they paved a road called Horus Road. It's named after Horus, which is a very famous god in Egypt.
And I was just going to ask you about Horus Military
exactly,
in
route,
that area
route.
in particular.
So, and they dug wells all the way along this route, and they have fortress all the way along this route, which is go through middle Sinai. And it was a custom of the Egyptian army in that period of time, in the New Kingdom, more specific in the 18th dynasty and the 19th dynasty, to go in a campaigns every year, more specific in the summertime, every year, in order to secure Sinai and secure the borders of Egypt as well. And that's why they maintain this route with the wells, with the infrastructure, with the fortress, so to make it easier for the Egyptian army to cross this road. So later on, after the collapse of the Egyptian New Kingdom and the collapse of the ancient Egyptian civilization, Sinai became a gateway again for the invaders. Alexander, that was his way to come to Egypt. The Persians before him, that's how they made it into Egypt. So it was the Crusaders later on. That's how they made it to Egypt. During 1956, the invasion of the French, British, and Israeli army. That's in 1956. That was their gateway to Egypt as well. And in between of that, there is many other armies. We talk about the French. We talked about the Ottomans. We talk about many armies from a Muslim background. That was the route into Egypt as well. So almost everybody, or every nation, or every army invaded Egypt. Through the history of Egypt, they came across Sinai. And that's giving you an idea of how important Sinai is.
So can you elaborate on the idea of Exodus and Sinai?
So that will bring us to another
Yes.
important topic when it comes to the importance of Sinai. Sinai is not only important from a strategic, for resources, for military, because of its route, but also is important from religious point of view. So there is a land where Moses received the Ten Commandments. I know that there is a dispute about that. But Moses Mountain, that's where St. Catherine Monastery, that is what many people believe in, that's where Moses received the Ten Commandments. So, and before that, that is the land where Moses actually wandered, and where he received the order from God by the burning bush, which is also within the St. Catherine Monastery as well. So that is the land actually where Joseph made it into Egypt, and his tribe after that, they made it into Egypt after that through this route as well. So we are talking, and there is the route for Abraham as well. So we are talking about Abraham, route to Egypt. We are talking about Joseph, route to Egypt, about his family and his tribe, how they made it into Egypt. We are talking about Moses actually being in Egypt and being in Sinai, and we are talking about that his return to Sinai when he led the Israelites, that was also in Sinai. And after that, we are talking about Jesus and the Holy Family trip, which is documented in the book of Matthew, verse 13, 14, and 15. Wake up, take the child and his mother and go out to Egypt, when he was a baby, seeking for a safe land to escape the persecution or the killing in Jerusalem. He made it to Egypt through Sinai. And when he returned back to Jerusalem after about 3 years, he made it back through Sinai as well.
So these are, of course, physical events, evidence actually that Sinai is an integral part of Egypt, going back to ancient Egyptians. So, Mr.
There is not for us, it is not a debatable subject. It could be for others.
At the end, Mr. Samir Abbass, our Egyptologist, thank you very much for joining us.